Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
Boise State Public Radio and Duck Club Entertainment present the Charlie Hunter Trio.
Charlie Hunter Trio, everybody.
Wednesday, March 18th at the Shrine Social Club in Boise. Blending jazz, funk, blues, and rock, Hunter is a guitarist, producer, and bandleader who will present his unique finger-picking technique on custom hybrid guitars. Tickets are available now at theduckclub.com.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Sage grouse have been disappearing across the West for decades, and a new documentary goes in search of the iconic bird. Chris Milgate chased the grouse through Idaho and 4 other states back in 2024 and found a lot more than she bargained for, including cows, crickets, even trash, while talking to ranchers and tribal members, activists, and scientists.
People look out there and they don't see anything. But it's actually entirely wrong. These places are full of life.
Sage grouse are the lifeblood of the West.
They need that system to thrive in, and if sagebrush is gone, so is the sage grouse.
Their historic range has shrunk. On a given year, half of the nests out there will fail. There's a lot of good work going on right now across sage grouse range trying to protect that habitat.
We got to rebalance what we've been doing for 140 years on this landscape and be doing something different.
Humans have always been on the landscape, and that's not going to change anytime soon. We have to work with the people that are on the landscape in order to make positive changes for the ecosystem.
The desert is not a wasteland. The deserts are full of life.
Go out and take a look at what's going on out there, and then you'll gain an appreciation for it pretty fast.
Milgate's film, Sage Wisdom West, premieres in Idaho Falls at the Colonial Theater on April 2nd. She's an outdoor journalist and owner of Tightline Media, and she's joining us now to talk more about this. Chris, really nice to have you on the show. Welcome.
Hi, Gemma.
So, Chris, what got you on the trail of sage grouse?
Well, I call these projects when I make a wildlife film my biggies. And my biggies have been salmon migration, grizzly recovery. So we had a fish and then we had a bear. And I thought it was time to look at birds. And so I chose sage grouse as a showcase for feathers because they are the icon of the West. And I wanted to show you what's happening with that population.
And the sage grouse population has been shrinking, as I mentioned. Can you talk about how much drop have we seen?
The one thing about working on a species like sage grouse is that they're monitored. So every state has a pretty good handle on how many birds they have left. And while numbers may go up one year versus another year, if you take the big picture and look at over the decades, 80% of the sage grouse population has disappeared since 1965. That's significant.
80%?
80.
That is a lot.
8%.
So you started shooting this film back in 2024, and this was when 11 states had populations of the bird. So how many states have them now? Are there still 11 states?
The shocking thing about doing a project like this is what can change when you're in production. When I'm running around in the desert looking for birds, there's always a chance that things might change. It's a dynamic issue. These bird populations fluctuate dramatically. Case in point, when I start shooting this film in 2024, there's 11 states. In 2025, we lost a whole state. North Dakota had 0 males. That's virtually extinction. There's no other way to make more baby birds if you don't have males. And so that was when I realized I had picked an issue that was relevant, that needed to be covered now, and it was time to showcase a bird that you needed to see before it declined anymore. We don't want to lose any more states.
Mhm. So, Chris, how does one know when there is no more particular species like the sage, like this bird, like the sage grouse, no longer in a particular state?
That's a great question. Sage grouse rely on sagebrush. They need it year round, they need it through all stages of life. As the sagebrush canopy disappears, so too does the bird. So in the West, you have states like Idaho, Oregon, Nevada, Montana, Wyoming. They have sagebrush. You get farther out, you're getting into the fringe of places like the Dakotas. Every spring, sage grouse return to their mating grounds, which are called leks. They return to the same spot every year. They are faithful to those spots, so biologists can go to those spots and they count how many birds are there. Males in the spring look very different than females. Males have these big airbags on their chest that they puff up, and their tail feathers fan out like spikes pointing up into the sky, so they can be counted. When you go to a lek and you've been able to count birds on it, and you show up at a lek and there's no fan of tail feathers and no males, then that's how you know you're counting you're
Mm.
counting a loss. There are historical leks where birds don't come back anymore. They still are checked by biologists just to see if something might show up. But when you have no males on a lek, that tells you that if unless one wanders in from Montana or South Dakota, North Dakota doesn't have a viable population of sage grouse anymore.
Mm. So, when you decided to put the film together, who did you decide to start talking to about the film? I mean, because there are ranchers, there are scientists in this documentary.
The most important thing I can do when I'm covering a wildlife issue is gather every perspective possible. And these have to be perspectives that are valid, that are relevant, that have a stake in what's happening to the landscape that these birds rely on. Sage grouse need that sagebrush, and it covers a lot of the West. So I start thinking about, well, who's impacted by something like a sage grouse bird? I mean, this isn't a bird that's on the endangered species list, but it warranted it at one time. So what does that mean for the West? It means a lot of things. It means that we have to think about how we recreate, how we ranch, how we develop, how we drill, how we mine. All of that's going on, and yet this bird's still existing. And so I want to look at how we are trying to let this bird make its way with us in the way, but at the same time, I want to look at what we've done to this landscape over the last century. That's where the history comes in. And then go back even farther. What about tribes? What does this landscape and this bird mean to them? That has a place in the story. So all these perspectives about the desert and this desert bird have to come together so that I can tell you a story that is accurate and balanced, and it shows you the challenges, but it also celebrates the fact that this bird is still here despite the odds.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with Chris Milgate. She is a documentary filmmaker, and we're talking about her latest documentary about sage grouse. It's called Sage Wisdom West. It's going to be premiering at the Colonial Theater in Idaho Falls on April 2nd. So, Chris, you, as you said, you went out into the desert. You were trying to track sage grouse. Can you talk a little bit about what you found out there?
I can talk a lot about what I found out
Okay.
there because it is truly eye-opening, but I'm going to just kind of bring it down for you. Think about this. This whole project has to be done at a lower scale. If I'm following grizzlies, they're large, they stick up in the landscape, their shoulder humps are big, they're taller than sagebrush. Sage grouse are made to hide in sagebrush. They are built at that level so that they can be under the canopy. That means for me, I spend a lot of time crawling around in the dirt, laying with,
Mm.
I have mud from my ankles to elbows on my rain gear from laying under that canopy. And when you get under there, you realize there is so much going on that is off our radar. We all think of the sagebrush steppe as a landscape that's off our radar, but what's underneath that sagebrush is even more off our radar. There's just some fantastic things going on under there, from fungus to moss to the place where the birds hide their eggs. And then there's all the things that we leave out there, our black eyes, which is eye-opening in itself. There's so much trash out there. And I even had someone ask me, did you find any bodies out there?
Oh,
Luckily, I did not find any bodies. I found a lot of animal bodies and bone piles, but what I found from us was a lot of trash. And I pick it up every time I'm out in the desert. My husband's always saying, "When did you start drinking Coors?" I don't drink Coors beer, but those cans are in my truck because I pick them up. The beer cans are the most common thing you find out there. The one thing that I will tell you that I don't pick up when I'm out in the desert is toilet paper. It just sicks me out because
Oh,
there's a
yeah.
lot of it and
Yeah.
you don't know what's going on with it. So that was a find. Crickets. The crickets are not put out there by us like trash, but they are out there. And we have tried many, many times over the century to try to eradicate them. But when you come across a cricket migration, you just have to stop and look at it. The way it sounds, the way it smells, the way it looks. When I go back on the smell is alarming, especially when you're driving through it because you're basically caking your vehicle in blood and guts from the crickets. And so that kind of was on my vehicle, and my camper is what I work out of when I'm on the road. So my truck and camper, like if you got within 100 feet of my camper, you'd be asking me what the smell was. So there's all kinds of things going on out there that a lot of us just fly by and not even think about. But it's a beautiful and remarkable landscape that offers a lot if you just stop and look. And even better, if you lay down on your belly and look under the sagebrush.
So when you talk about these cricket um, kind of sound like invasions, I mean, how often were you running into these behind the camera?
Oh, it depends on the time of year that you run into them. I would say the biggest biggest cricket migration I ran into in the sagebrush steppe would have been in Nevada, closer to the Idaho border. And it was about, I want to say June, May, or maybe May. And
Mm,
they coat the road and they're big, like as big as your hand.
wow.
So
Oh my
it's a
goodness.
yeah, they're big. They're not the little black crickets.
Okay. So
So
my
they're
understanding
gentle.
is okay, my understanding is you also had interactions between some trail cams and cows. So what happened here?
Yes. So the one thing I really like to do when I'm trying to document wildlife is use trail cameras. And that started because I had a safety factor when I was following grizzly recovery through Greater Yellowstone. I wanted to see the bears, but I didn't want to be in the bear space. That's just not smart. And so I started using trail cameras and I continue to use them today. For sage grouse, it wasn't a safety issue. It was more of, I want to see what they're doing. How are they making their way without us in the way? And so I used trail cameras for that. And I wanted to see what happens at fencing. Wildlife run into fence all over Idaho. So I put trail cameras up. The problem is there's not a lot of big trees in the desert that you can wrap your trail cam straps around. So I had to stake them in the ground. And that's a risk. Like they could get stolen, but they didn't get stolen, but they did get worn. And they got worn by a cow. And I think what happened is she grazed it. It was a cow grazing on public land, which is very common. And she was just curious about the camera, nudged it with her nose, and ended up with the strap around her neck, and then ran around in the desert, showing me everything you could see in a way that would make you motion
Mm.
sick. So it's not usable footage, but it is funny footage.
Like that, but it's funny footage. So, did the sage grouse ever spot you behind the camera?
Huh. So what I like to do with wildlife is I want them to do their thing without me making them react in a certain way. I don't want them to know I'm there. That's the beauty of a trail camera. But you also want cameras. I have 8 cameras that I work with. And you want those beautiful shots. You want the shots that make people sit down and watch so that they learn about what you're telling them. And so I would sit in a blind at a lek and watch them strut in the spring. I mean, that's what they're doing right now. Think about it. Every morning, sunrise, every night, sunset, those birds meet in the same spot and they dance and they're trying to attract a mate. And I wanted to see that. But there were mornings, even with a blind, where I would get in there in the dark at 5 in the morning, freezing, hold still, and I'd sit in this tent with no floor but a lot of windows that I could point my camera out. And then there'd be mornings when the sun would come up and there wouldn't be a single bird. And they're faithful to those places, but they're really exposed in those places because they're open, bare ground. And so anything can come in that wants to eat them. Everything wants to eat them out there. Coyotes can come in, eagles can come in. If they come in on a morning that I'm trying to capture footage, they're gone and they don't come back that day. And so there were times when maybe I didn't necessarily spook them, but something spooked them. And they left for the day and no one got lucky, not even me.
So you mentioned how, you were crawling around, right? I mean, covered
Yeah.
in mud from ankles to elbows. Um, but when you first started filming, it was really, really cold. So take us through what that was like being in the desert in winter.
The first thing I can tell you about the desert in winter is that it's extremely cold and beautiful to the extreme and quiet and not as much wind as we have now in the spring. But why I start in the winter is January, February, you're not really in the bird's way. They don't start clustering up to get on their leks until March. And so I knew that I could practice following bird behavior. And the whole goal was just to learn how to use my camera when a bird flies up out of the sagebrush. It's a startling experience. You want to jump. When you're holding a video camera, you don't have that option. You can't jump or you ruin your shot. So I was trying to learn how they fly, and I started in January. And the first day of field production, I'm covered nose to toes in multiple layers because it was negative 12 degrees. And that's hard conditions to work in. And I just wanted to see if I could follow the birds. And I'll tell you, I tanked the whole day. I eventually figured out where to point my camera, but none of the footage was usable. And it taught me right away that I had underestimated this 7-pound bird, and it was going to serve me up a big piece of humble pie for the next 2 years as I tried to figure out how to show you this dynamic bird in the desert.
Chris, you've also written how hard it was to cover the birds in winter because of your multiple sclerosis. And not just the cold, but because your immune system attacks your nervous system. So talk to us a little bit about that other hurdle that you were dealing with.
Every wildlife film I do has a backstory. And the reason it has a backstory is because people are really curious about what it's like to do my job. So for Sage Wisdom West, the backstory book is called My Place Among Birds. And when you dig into that book, it is certainly about the birds. And the film is certainly about these birds and their desert. But the backstory is about what it's like to do my job. And a lot of times I'm alone when I do my job. A lot of times I'm in less than glamorous situations where the snot in my nose freezes because it's so cold, or my nose bleeds because it's so hot, or my legs want to stop working because they don't understand how to do temperature swings anymore because multiple sclerosis kind of messes with everything in your body. And it's not that I want my story to be the most important, but it's that people ask me enough about it that I know that that story matters and they want the backstory. So instead of putting the backstory inside the film, I leave the film to showcase the wildlife, which is the whole point of the film. And then I do these backstory books that go with it that tell you what indeed it is like to to work sometimes as a lone woman in the woods and how to push through struggles when your body is not in sync with your motivations. Sometimes what I want to do and what my body wants to do doesn't match up, and I hate that. But I will work through that because I don't find laying down to have any appeal.
Talk to us a little bit more about the book that documents your journey. Because, you said people are curious about the backstory, but I mean, that's another big project to take on.
So writing a film or writing a book while you're editing a film sounds ridiculous. It's just this huge pile of challenge, but I find that I am intrigued by challenge. And so it's doable because it's not easy. I like that. But also it intrigues me because it's not as overwhelming as you think, is what I mean. And the intrigue is there because what I'm doing is I'm researching about sage grouse, but at the same time, all that research works for a book too. So what I do is I toggle between these two big projects at the same time, where in one day I will edit a few minutes of video on the film, and then I'll switch and I'll write a few chapters or a few pages of the book. And they kind of go in tandem so that the content is similar in that we're talking about the desert and the bird in the desert, but then things will switch out where I need to talk about the backstory about how I got the shot that you see in the film and those kind of things. They kind of actually pair quite nicely as long as I can make sure that my head switches. When you're writing script for video, That's a lot different than writing a chapter for a book. The way you describe things is different. And so I have the ability to switch between the two as long as the subject matter seems to be similar.
Oh, I can only imagine how hard this must have been on you physically. I mean, you've given us a little bit of a look into that during our conversation today. Why did you stick with it? I mean, because physically what this can do to you. I mean, why was it that important that you were going to push through all of this to make sure this story was told?
It's important to tell stories of wildlife simply because they don't have a voice that we understand to tell it themselves. And in the West, we have some amazing wildlife successes and failures. And those are part of the things that make us who we are in the American West. And I find that the harder a subject is, the more intrigued I am. That's just how I'm wired. And there's nothing in me that wants to give up. And so you never give up on yourself and you never give up on the wild. There's always something out there to learn. There's always something out there that's interesting. And there's always something out there that matters. So even if it takes a piece of me to do it, which all these wildlife films do, I feel like that is worth sharing with the world, even if it costs me a little bit every time I do it.
Mm. You, why are you deciding to premiere the movie in Idaho Falls?
I am premiering Sage Wisdom West in Idaho Falls because that is my hometown. And it's always fun to show the first world premiere of anything that I produce in my hometown because people show up that have known me for a long time. I was a reporter for 10 years before I started Tightline Media, which is now 20 years old. And there's some history here, and it's important to keep those roots. And every time I do a subject matter, Idaho always has a tie back to it. I have to be interested in it too if I expect you to be interested. And so it's more of an honor, or it's an exciting thing to show in my hometown, but it's also more of a respect thing. Like, these people have thrown in with me for decades in my news coverage of the outdoor space and of environment issues and wildlife issues. And it's fun to show it to them, but it's also an honor to share an evening with them the first time I show it.
And where else will people be able to see the movie?
Sage Wisdom West has a film tour planned throughout the West, and it has different locations in different states that will go through the spring. And then it will also end up online so that you can watch it virtually at home, pop some popcorn and watch it at home as a movie night. And it also will eventually end up on public television. So Idaho Public TV will have air dates, as will other PBS stations across the country.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. We've been speaking with Chris Milgate, outdoor journalist and owner of Tightline Media, talking about her new documentary about sage grouse. It's called Sage Wisdom West, and it will be premiering at the Colonial Theater in Idaho Falls on April 2nd. We will put some pictures from the film on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org, so be sure to check that out. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Make sure you check out our podcast feed because you can find more episodes of topics that might be interesting to you. And for more local news and headlines, make sure you subscribe to the Connector podcast. And if you haven't yet, could I ask you to leave us a review wherever you listen? We read every single one, and we'd love to hear from you.